The dawn of 1814 crept over Ashcombe Estate like a memory struggling to remain alive, washing the frostbitten land in a pearl-gray light that revealed more sorrow than splendor. Once, the estate had been the pride of the countryside, a place where lanterns glowed late into the night and laughter carried beyond the orchards. Now, ivy strangled the unpainted walls, the gardens lay neglected, and the rooflines sagged beneath winters of disrepair. Lady Eleanor Ashcombe tightened her cloak as she moved through the silent corridor, her breath ghosting in the cold air. Each step felt like a farewell, not just to her childhood home, but to the version of herself who had endured its unraveling with dutiful patience. She had risen before the household stirred, though dawn had always been her favorite hour. It was the time when possibilities felt least forbidden, when even a baronet's daughter might imagine a different life than the one laid before her. Yet today imagination had hardened into resolve. She was leaving, not for an adventure, not for scandal, but because the only alternative was to surrender her future to a man who desired her pedigree rather than her presence. The Earl of Rivington, decades her senior and twice widowed, had extended his proposal with the smug assurance of a man who believed women should be grateful for the shelter of his name. Her father, desperate to restore the family's finances, agreed at once. Eleanor paused in the dim foyer, glancing at the portrait of her late mother, serene, lovely, and forever silent. She imagined what her mother might say if she saw her daughter poised to defy the path laid out for her. Perhaps she would caution her about dangers. Perhaps she would urge courage. Eleanor clasped her hands together, wishing she could ask. But the time for hesitation had passed. She stepped outside into the hush of winter, the crunch of frost beneath her boots the only sound acknowledging her departure. Yet as she neared the wrought iron gate, her heart faltered. A silhouette loomed beside it, dark, still, and unmistakably deliberate. For a moment she wondered if her father had discovered her intentions and sent a servant to drag her back. But the figure stood too tall, too poised, and emanated a familiarity that struck her like a forgotten melody. The Duke of Harland waited astride a black stallion, his posture rigid yet elegant, his cloak stirring in the faint morning wind. Nathaniel Harland had always seemed made of stormlight and discipline, a man carved from honor rather than convenience. She had not expected to see him again so soon, much less here. He dismounted with controlled grace, boots landing softly on the frozen earth. "Running away at dawn, Eleanor?" His voice, low and steady, carried the authority of a commander yet softened with something she could not name. He approached, not blocking her path but simply being in it. Snowflakes clung to the dark strands of his hair, refusing to melt against the coldness of his composure. She lifted her chin, though her pulse betrayed her. "If you intend to lecture me, I assure you I have no patience left for it. I did not come to lecture." His gaze searched hers, measured, somber, carrying shadows of battlefields she had only heard whispered about. "I came because I knew what your father would ask of you. And I knew you would refuse." Her fingers tightened around the worn handle of her small traveling bag. "Knowing and approving are not the same." "No," he agreed, "but protecting and interfering are not the same either." The words unsettled her more than the intrusion. Nathaniel had been her brother's closest friend, his companion in the Napoleonic campaigns, the man who carried the news of his death with a solemn grief that had nearly undone her. After that he visited Ashcombe only rarely. When he did, he was courteous yet remote, as if the war had carved a distance in him no peace could repair. Eleanor had once thought him unattainable, a figure of disciplined calm and impossible standards. She had admired him with the timid awe of youth. But admiration had no place now. Not when her life hung on decisions made without her. "Why are you here?" she asked. His breath clouded between them. "Because I cannot allow you to be forced into that marriage." "You cannot allow?" She laughed softly, bitterly. "You sound exactly like the men who presume to command my life." He did not recoil. Instead he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Eleanor, listen. Rivington wants an heir to parade before society before spring ends. He has debts far worse than your father admits, and a reputation darker than rumor dares to say aloud." She swallowed. "And you expect me to trust your judgment?" "No," he answered quietly. I expect you to trust that I would never lie to you. Something warm flickered in her chest before she smothered it. She should have been furious, but instead she felt exposed, as though he had peeled back the armor she had spent years constructing. Even if everything you say is true, I have nowhere else to go. That, he said, is why I am here. He motioned toward his horse, then toward the road beyond the gate. Come with me to London. To London? Her voice shook despite her effort. For what purpose? He hesitated, not the pause of uncertainty but the pause of a man weighing consequences. There is a Christmas ball at Harrington House in 4 days. I need you to attend with me, as my fiancée. The world seemed to still. Her breath caught so sharply she wondered if the cold had frozen at mid-chest. Your fiancée. For 1 night only, he clarified. A facade. Nothing more. Eleanor searched his expression for mockery, but found only restrained earnestness. Why me? Because London's eyes are fixed on me, he said. Because a false engagement protects you from being seized by your father or the Earl. And because, he added more softly, you are the only woman I trust to stand beside me without fear. Her pulse thundered. The offer was madness, salvation, and danger intertwined. She should refuse. She should question everything. Yet as the first light of morning spilled over the gate, revealing the harsh truth of her limited choices, she realized she was already stepping toward the path he offered. The Duke extended his hand, gloved and steady. Eleanor stared at it, aware that taking it would change not only the day, but perhaps the entire course of her life. She placed her hand in his. And the world ahead began to shift. The journey to London began in a silence thick with unspoken questions, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of the carriage wheels cutting through the winter road. Eleanor sat opposite the Duke, her hands folded neatly over her lap, though nothing within her felt neat or composed. The morning's shock still thrummed in her veins. To flee an arranged marriage had required courage. To step willingly into a false engagement with a man like Nathaniel Harland required something far more bewildering, a trust she had never meant to give. He watched the passing landscape with a soldier's vigilance, though his expression betrayed little beyond a quiet tension that seemed native to him. She studied him cautiously, noting the faint scar that traced from the corner of his jaw to the line of his neck, a relic of battles she would never fully comprehend. Yet that scar, harsh as it was, softened the intimidating perfection of him, making him human rather than myth. She finally spoke, her voice steadier than she felt. You still haven't explained why a man of your station would need a fiancée, false or otherwise. He did not turn from the window at first, as though searching the bare winter fields for an answer. When he did look at her, his eyes held a quiet weight. Because London requires reassurances I can no longer give. My return from the war unsettled certain arrangements. Old families whisper that my absence made me inattentive to the responsibilities of my title. Others fear I intend to shift alliances. A public engagement at the Christmas ball will silence both. Then his tone deepened. But I will not bind any woman to a life of scrutiny and political warfare. A pretense is safer for all involved. She absorbed this, feeling the complexity of his world press around her. And you believe I can withstand that scrutiny? He studied her more intently than he ever had before. I believe you have endured far worse without flinching. The compliment startled her more than his proposition had. Eleanor had endured her father's disappointments, society's lowered gazes, and a future bartered like a ledger entry. Yet hearing her resilience recognized by the Duke of Harland, who had faced cannons and kingdoms, unsettled her in ways she could not articulate. She looked away, forcing her mind toward practical matters. If we are to deceive London, we must rehearse the details. How long have we been engaged? 3 weeks, he replied without hesitation. Long enough for me to have informed a few trusted allies, short enough that the news remains fresh. And how did you propose? A faint, almost reluctant smile touched his lips. Must you know every detail? If society asks, I must answer. His gaze lingered on her, as though her insistence amused him. Very well. I asked you after delivering a letter to your father. It was raining. You were standing at the entrance hall, pretending not to worry that I would ride off again. She blinked. You assume I would worry? I assume, he said gently, that any woman agreeing to such a scheme would prefer a story with some tenderness. Her heartbeat stumbled. Her mind scrambled for distance. And what explanation do we give for your sudden choice of bride? His expression darkened, not in anger but in something harder to decipher. I will say only what is true, that you are a woman whose character I admire, and whose intelligence suits a duchess. No one will question that. His honesty disarmed her more than any practiced lie might have. She shifted her attention to the window, watching the countryside give way to towns, towns give way to the outskirts of London, chimney smoke rising like ink against the grey sky. Harland House awaited them, a place she had seen only once in childhood, when her brother had returned from the academy with Nathaniel at his side. Back then it had felt like standing before a monument. Now she would be entering as something far more intimate. When the carriage finally halted before the grand entrance, she understood immediately why London whispered about the Duke. Harland House stood tall and severe, its stone facade touched by frost but unbroken by time. Columns framed the wide steps, and the massive oak doors bore the coat of arms of generations who had commanded armies and estates. Servants hurried out, their faces registering shock as Nathaniel stepped down and offered his hand to Eleanor. She accepted, aware that every eye watched her, her role already beginning. Inside, warmth enveloped her, polished floors, gilded frames, and tall windows veiled with winter light. Nathaniel dismissed the servants with a nod, then turned to her with a careful calm. No matter what unfolds tonight or at the ball, you must feel secure here. No one can force you to leave without my consent. The offer sounded protective rather than possessive, but it unsettled her all the same. And if someone discovers the truth? Then I will handle the consequences. He paused. You will not suffer for this. Eleanor believed him, though she could not explain why. There was something about the Duke's certainty, a steadiness earned through hardship, that soothed her panic even as it stirred other emotions she dared not name. As he guided her through corridors lined with portraits of grim ancestors, she noticed how his shoulders carried a subtle tension, as though every step within these walls reminded him of expectations closing in. They stopped before a small drawing room lit by the glow of a single hearth. The crackling fire filled the room with a soft radiance. Nathaniel remained standing while she sank into a nearby chair, her travel weariness finally breaking through her resolve. But before fatigue claimed her, he spoke. There is something you must understand before we proceed. His tone deepened, and for the first time she sensed unease. This arrangement is temporary. Whatever admiration I hold for you, and it is not small, it cannot be allowed to become something more. She looked up sharply. Are you warning me? I am setting the rule by which this pretense must survive, he said quietly. Eleanor, you must not fall in love with me. For a heartbeat she could not speak. The arrogance of the statement should have angered her. Instead, a curious ache bloomed inside her, not because she feared the rule, but because she wondered why he felt compelled to make it. You presume much, she murmured, though her voice lacked its usual bite. I presume the patterns of human hearts, he replied, though a shadow passed behind his eyes. War teaches a man what he cannot keep. I will not offer a woman hope I cannot honor. His honesty was sharper than any command. She sensed wounds in him deeper than scars, quiet stories he would sooner swallow than speak. Eleanor stood, steadying herself. Then we shall succeed. You need an ally, not a romantic fool. I assure you, Your Grace, my heart has more pressing concerns than chasing impossible attachment. Something in his expression flickered, relief, doubt, or a feeling he could not easily conceal. He nodded once. Then we understand each other. Yet as she walked past him, she felt the weight of his gaze following her, not with possessiveness, but with something dangerously close to longing, as if he himself feared the rule he had spoken. The fire crackled. The house settled. And between them stretched an unspoken promise neither entirely trusted but both would now have to follow into London's glittering, perilous heart. Snow fell in thin, glinting threads upon Harrington House as the Christmas ball reached its glittering height, muffling the city beyond and turning the gardens into a world shaped solely for secrets. Eleanor slipped through the terrace doors, drawing her cloak tighter around her shoulders. Inside, London's finest danced beneath chandeliers, their laughter rising above the orchestra in a practiced harmony that excluded, dismissed, and devoured anything unfamiliar. She had played her role well, better than she dared hope, but the strain of deception pressed upon her, tightening her breath. She needed air or space, or simply a moment without the Duke's steady presence at her side reminding her of the rules she had sworn to uphold. The winter garden glowed faintly under lanterns hung from skeletal branches. Frost clung to the hedges like powdered glass. She walked deeper into the quiet until the music faded into a distant hum. Here, the facade she had carried all evening finally loosened. She exhaled, watching her breath form a ghost in the cold. Her heart, however, would not still. Every glance the Duke had given her, every protective touch to guide her, every subtle defense against curious eyes, had ignited a warmth she had vowed to resist. He was supposed to be a shield, not a temptation. Footsteps sounded behind her, soft yet unmistakably purposeful. She turned before he reached her, bracing herself not for danger but for the man she feared she could no longer avoid. Nathaniel stepped into the pale light, his dark cloak sweeping across the frost, his expression unreadable. For a moment he said nothing, simply observing her with a quiet intensity that unsettled her more than any confrontation. "You left the ballroom without a word," he said, his voice low but controlled. "I thought you might have been cornered." "I needed air," she replied, forcing steadiness. "And I can take care of myself." "I have never doubted that." He came closer, stopping only a few paces away. "But tonight, every eye in that room watches for any crack in our performance." "A performance I've upheld flawlessly," she said, though her voice softened. "But even actresses must rest." A faint shadow crossed his features. "You're trembling." "I'm cold," she said quickly, though the lie held only a sliver of truth. The cold was not what shook her. It was the memory of how he had looked at her earlier, when she descended the grand staircase in her winter white gown and murmurs rippled through the crowd. The admiration in his eyes had not been feigned. It had unsettled her ever since. He stepped closer, gently adjusting her cloak without asking permission. His touch grazed her shoulder, light yet charged. "You were remarkable tonight," he said quietly. "No one doubted us. Not for a moment." She swallowed. "And yet you looked troubled." His jaw tightened. "Because part of me forgot it was an act." Her breath halted. The garden seemed to still around them. "Nathaniel." He shut his eyes briefly, as if waging a silent war within himself. "Eleanor, I told you my rule because I believed it would protect us both. But standing beside you tonight, watching you navigate that room with grace I could never command, hearing you speak with such confidence, I realized the danger was never your heart." His eyes opened, dark and unguarded. "It was mine." She felt the ground tilt, not from shock but from recognition of what she had already feared. "You said you could not offer a woman hope," she whispered. "I still believe that," he said. "War taught me the cost of attachment. Everyone I protected was taken from me. Everyone I trusted buried beneath promises I failed to keep. I thought distance was the only safety left to me." "And now?" she asked. "Now," he said, stepping close enough that she felt the warmth of his breath, "distance feels like a battlefield I no longer wish to endure." His confession cleaved through her, both painful and deeply tender. She wanted to reach for him, but fear tangled with desire. "Nathaniel, if you break your own rule, what becomes of our arrangement?" "There is no arrangement left," he answered gently. "Only truth." Before she could speak, voices drifted from the terrace. She recognized Lord Kincairn's sharp tone, the very man who had circled them all evening with a predator's smile. Eleanor stiffened, and Nathaniel's posture shifted instantly, protective and alert. Kincairn stepped into view, his expression triumphant, as though he had caught them in a crime. "How fortunate to find you both alone," he drawled. "Your Grace, Lady Eleanor, London will be fascinated to hear how neatly your story unravels outside candlelight." Nathaniel moved subtly in front of her. "State your purpose, Kincairn." Oh, I believe you know it well, King Cairn said, eyes gleaming. A sudden engagement without witnesses? A lady fleeing her family? It reeks of fabrication. Unless, of course, the young lady wishes me to believe your devotion is genuine? His smile curled. Does she? Eleanor felt the trap tighten. If Nathaniel fought, scandal would erupt. If she fled, King Cairn would expose everything. But a calm clarity settled over her, born of the very strength Nathaniel had once claimed she possessed. She stepped beside him, not behind him. My lord, she said evenly, before you threaten others with ruin, consider your own. She held his cold gaze with steady resolve. Your debts with Lord Ashbury are known. Your refusal to repay him despite 3 notices is known. And your attempt to secure the dowry of his niece to restore your standing is known. She leaned forward slightly. Shall we see which scandal reaches London first? King Cairn's smirk vanished. A flush crept up his neck, his confidence draining as swiftly as wine from a shattered glass. Without another word, he retreated into the shadows, his plans collapsing under the weight of his own vulnerability. Silence returned. Nathaniel turned to Eleanor slowly, wonder softening his features. You just dismantled a man who has tormented half the ton for years. She exhaled shakily. I simply reminded him that threats are dull weapons when one has nothing left to fear. A slow, reverent admiration filled his gaze, an admiration unfiltered by protocol or restraint. Eleanor, he said, voice low, I do not want a pretense. Not anymore. Her pulse quickened. Then what do you want? You, he answered, with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. Not as a shield, not as a story, but as the woman I cannot walk away from. She searched his face, finding no hesitation, no shadows of doubt. Only truth, raw, vulnerable, and fiercely sincere. Then you break your rule, she whispered. He smiled faintly. Gladly. Snow drifted between them, but neither moved away. When he kissed her, it was not with urgency but with reverent certainty, as though the moment itself had been waiting for them, suspended between winter and possibility. She felt the world narrow to the warmth of him, the steadiness of his embrace, the quiet promise beneath the tenderness. When they parted, the Duke slowly sank to one knee, not in ceremony but in devotion. Eleanor Ashcombe, he said softly, let this be no pretense. Will you choose me? Truly and without disguise. Emotion swelled inside her, love, relief, and a fierce sense of belonging. Yes, she breathed. Not because I must. Because I want to. He rose and drew her into his arms, the winter garden their only witness. Behind them, the ballroom glittered on, unaware that something deeper than any celebration had unfolded, a truth neither rule nor facade could contain. And as snow continued to fall upon London, the future before them shimmered, uncharted, fragile, and beautifully real.